crazy to think that we've gone over a decade without a solo Superman movie. And not only that, even though he's appeared in multiple animated works, it's also been 27 years since we've had a solo Superman animated series. But patience is a virtue. Sometimes, when you wait a long time for something, it was really worth it in the end. And I cannot describe how happy I was watching my adventures with Superman and realizing that it was beyond worth being patient. Because not only do we get a fantastic Superman show, we are also getting a piece of work that has the potential of being one of the greatest interpretations of Superman in any medium ever. I know it's a huge cliche to say that a work of fiction is a love letter to something when it's really good, but I think that the term perfectly describes my adventures with Superman, since it's clear from its writing, influences, and art direction that the creatives involved with this show had a clear understanding and appreciation for the character of Superman and his world. Something that we can tell from the series' great attention to detail throughout its episodes, given that its references are more than just simple comic book Easter eggs, and they are actually a very smart way of adding substance to the show. Things like Jimmy's internet alias being Flamebird, which is a reference to a Silver Age story where Superman and him get trapped in the bottled city of Kandor, and they adopt the legendary Kryptonian hero identities of Nightwing and Flamebird. Not only is it a cool deep cut from the comics, but it also adds to Jimmy's character and allows him to have subplots that tie into the show's main story and advances the overall plot. Or also the inclusion of characters like the News Kid Legion. Not only are they a great obscure group of characters created by the legendary Jack Kirby, they also serve to expand the show's cast of characters. The inclusion of Vicky Vale referencing Gotham and the little nod to the Aquaman storyline Sub Diego also serve to set the show within a larger DC universe, even though our main character will always be Clark. During one of Jimmy's live streams as Flamebird, one of the commenters is Bibbo, a supporting character from Superman comics who is a huge optimistic fan of his. All of these little details go a long way in making the world of this series more realized and well thought out, since it's apparent that the writers have a clear path in where they want to take these characters and the story, something that we can also tell by the show's great use of foreshadowing throughout its episodes. For example, in episode 1, Lois ends up feeling really bad because she lied to Clark and Jimmy and almost lost their jobs because of her, and she later apologizes to Clark at the end by saying no more secrets between us. And in a following episode, she also revealed to Clark during an intimate conversation that she doesn't like people being secretive with her because her father was very distant with her as well, which not only foreshadows the real identity of Lois's father, it's also foreshadowing the moment that Lois eventually finds out who Clark really is, and it feels justified when she gets offended that Clark has been lying to her this whole time. Another such moment happens in episode 2 when Superman touches Livewire's suit, which is made from Kryptonian tech, and Clark sees a flashback of Zero Day, which ties into the series finale. And in episode 5, it happens again when he touches some tech fighting against Heatwave and her crew. Also, in episode 1, one of the conspiracy theories that Jimmy believes in are talking gorillas.
PM.
PM could be initials like
Paranormal Metasapiens! It's the term for the super intelligent gorillas France has been hiding.
And later on in the show, Monsieur Mallah shows up. This French talking gorilla is also a great example of this show's reinvention and reinterpretation of classic comic book characters. I'm generally open to characters being reinterpreted as long as it's executed well. And while not all of the show's new takes and reinterpretations are all completely good, some are fantastic in my opinion, because sometimes not only did they manage to reinvent some of the characters, but they also subverted expectations as well. In the case of Monsieur Mallah and the Brain, in this show they are actually good guys rather than being evil, and they actually adapted their romantic relationship from the comics, which is awesome. Stuff like this exemplifies that the show's writers aren't just referencing the comics, but are also thinking critically about them and presenting these concepts in exciting new ways for both old and new fans of DC. It's attention to detail like this which illustrates that the creators of the series clearly have knowledge on comic books, the DC universe, and especially the Superman mythos and his character. I absolutely loved how they chose to portray Superman and Clark Kent in the show, a humble, shy, and introverted young man filled with self-doubt and insecurities, but who still tries to help everyone he can simply because he sincerely values all life on Earth. And even though there are people who instantly viewed him as a hero and tell him that he's a Superman, he never originally called himself Superman. It was a name that was given to him by the people that view him with hopeful eyes and see a man filled with infinite potential. Even though Clark himself doesn't feel like a Superman, he doesn't know who he is yet. He's trying to reflect on his identity issues while also trying to live up to the expectations of those people who love him. And he's also trying to prove wrong the skeptics who view him as a menace to the entire world. We can all relate to that feeling of uncertainty of who you are when you are that young. And beyond that, I simply love how they managed to completely nail Clark's characterization through his actions. This is a Superman that's constantly clarifying that he's here to help and not to cause any harm. He's always trying to talk down the villains and empathize with them. In episode 2, for example, Superman actually cleans collateral damage after a fight. I love that this is a show that puts a huge focus on him, specifically saving civilians many times throughout the series, and in episode 5, they even made a special point to purposefully stop a fight in order to save a bus filled with children, which was also a cool moment because there's a sequence where Deathstroke has a perfect shot at Superman and Amanda Waller actually tells him to take the shot, which would have killed Superman and the children, but the general orders him to stand down. This entire sequence is awesome because it showcased the complexity in the villain's morals, while also showcasing Superman's true character. But the best example that I can think from the show that perfectly encapsulates why the writers understand and love Superman so much is how they actually show him saving cats from trees multiple times throughout the show. This is not only a classic reference and trope that's been done in multiple stories, it also beautifully shows Clark's humility, because even though he is an all-powerful being, he has a pure and sincere love, appreciation, and need to protect all life. Even a tiny little kitty is worth the time of an all-powerful god. Clark is always being genuine, even though he might not always be completely sincere, since he is prone to lying. He's doing so out of ignorance really, and a frustration from not knowing his true origins and roots. The contrast between the interview scene between Lois and Superman in this show and any other interpretation is awesome. In previous stories like the '78 movie, he had already visited the Fortress of Solitude and had already learned everything about his past and culture. Most times, in most stories, whenever he meets Lois for the first time and have their interview, even though he's just starting out as Superman, in most cases, he already felt like a fully realized man that knows himself. But in this show, he doesn't know anything. He still has a lot of doubts and questions about himself. Lois believes he's being secretive and lying to her. But this Clark truly doesn't know anything about his heritage at this point. It really exemplifies why this Superman show is a coming-of-age story for him in the truest sense. He's learning who he is, he's getting to know himself and his roots, and reflect on what that means about him, and how it makes him feel, his lack of belief in himself, his confusion, anxiety, insecurities, and loneliness that stem from not knowing who he really is. Even when he steps inside the spaceship that brought him to Earth and is face to face with his biological father, Jor-El, a scene that should be a moment of clarity and epiphany for Clark just turns into yet another traumatic experience that instills fear in knowing his true self. This experience affected a young Clark so much that he tried to literally cover up his trauma. When he quickly covers up his Kryptonian ship with dirt, he's literally avoiding and burying the issue and doesn't want to truly reflect on who he is. I also have to praise how this show looks. The animation is really expressive and fluid in a way that allows for great action scenes. The visual look is great, and I also love its color palette, filled with pastel colors that perfectly capture the hopeful setting of Metropolis. And of course, I have to talk about how this show looks and feels like an anime. A lot of people might take offense when they hear my adventures with Superman being referred to as an anime, but personally, for shows like Avatar: The Last Airbender, Netflix's Castlevania, and now this show, I don't really have a problem with people calling them anime, because they clearly take inspiration from that style. I mean, anime itself is a term that in Japanese literally just means animation, plain and simple. So, in theory, if you go to Japan and ask a Japanese person what his favorite anime is, there's a chance he might say SpongeBob.
スポンジボブお前病院にでも入ったらどうなんじゃ違うよ入るのは
And I know that a lot of people strictly define anime as animation that comes from Japan specifically, but it's also a set of tropes, character designs, and visual styles that animated shows can replicate. I mean, look at this series called Tower of God. Just by looking at it, I want you to tell me if you think that this show is an anime. Yes? You think it's an anime? Because I also thought it was an anime at first sight. But this actually isn't a Japanese animated series. It was actually conceived and created in Korea. It's based on a Korean comic book, which if you don't know, are called manhwas. Not manga, manhwas. And animation that comes from Korea are called aeni. But I'm not calling it that. It's an anime. Same thing with shows like Avatar or the Superman series. Of course it isn't a Japanese anime. The technical term would be an anime-inspired American animated series, but man, I'm not calling it all that. Besides, this show not only feels like an anime through its visuals, it also goes through very similar plot beats as something like a shonen anime, for example. Not only are the fights very anime-esque, it's cool that we also get to see the progression of Superman, learning his powers and coming into his own. Like, we actually get to see him developing super hearing after becoming Superman. Him not controlling his strength and breaking stuff constantly isn't only just a funny recurring gag, but is also a means to show how inexperienced this Clark is. We see him learning to fly, of course, but we also get to see him learn most of his other powers as well, like him getting heat vision for the first time in the middle of a fight. The show also introduces a new power that turns Superman blue when he's in great danger or under a lot of stress, and it literally works just like a Zenkai boost from Dragon Ball Z, where whenever the Saiyans are at a critical health and near death, they get a boost in power. But this isn't only cool just on a superficial level because it's an anime-like power-up for Superman, it's also cool because Clark can materialize his Superman symbol. The fact that his family crest is literally inside of him symbolizes that the power to be a hero has always been within him. It's his literal birthright and something that's deep within him, even if he doesn't understand it. It's also a beautiful detail that his full Superman look is a combination of his Kryptonian heritage with modifications made by his human mother. It's another example of that beautiful attention to detail that I was talking about. The Lois and Clark romance and its evolution is one of the most beautiful aspects of the show. They do an amazing job in showing how they greatly complement one another, since Lois's direct and impulsive personality confronts with Clark's tendencies to literally and metaphorically bury his traumas, insecurities, and close himself off. Her extrovertedness helps with the shortcomings of Clark's more introverted personality. She gets him not only to stop lying to other people, but also to stop living a lie and to be more open with his loved ones, but more importantly with himself. And Clark's good nature and values make Lois empathize and realize how her actions affect other people, such as when they almost got fired because of her. They are a great positive couple that help each other grow as better people. The show does a great job in showing why they're one of the greatest fictional couples ever.
Hold on.
Lois should have died there. She should be dead. Lois Lane herself is also great. She's spunky, charismatic, and generally a good person that gets in harm's way, trying to get the next scoop, but she also helps, and her investigating all the time moves the story forward. They always find a way for her to be useful to the overall plot. Her relationship with Clark is simply beautiful. Here I also wanted to give a spoiler warning for those of you who still haven't seen the last few episodes from Season 1, since I want to talk about some reveals that happened there, so if you couldn't guess by now, I think this is a very good show. It's awesome, and more than worth checking out. Another thing that the show handled really well is the reveal that the General is actually Sam Lane, Lois's father, who is a morally conflicted antagonist. And it's awesome how they showed his character growth and change and how he sees Superman, and showing him realizing that Clark isn't pretending to be a human being, he is a human being. Just a kid no older than his own daughter, with huge potential and that just wants to help, and how his trauma from being present on the 0 day affects his decisions and turns him into a cold person. The entire 0-hour mystery is great. I thought it was a very engaging plotline throughout the season, and they did a great job with gradually revealing information to the audience in a way that captures people's attention. For example, if you are a lifelong Superman fan, I'm sure that you probably wasn't surprised by the Sam Lane reveal. You probably had already figured it out, but what's great about this show is that even if you are a new fan and this was your first exposure to the Superman mythos, you still could have been able to figure out the general's identity, not because the show made the mystery obvious, but because they planted a lot of clues and foreshadowing that viewers who were paying extra attention probably caught on, which is another sign that this show is really well written and well thought out. The Jimmy Olsen of the show is also one of the best versions of the character ever. He shows why Jimmy is important. He's Clark's closest friend, and he grounds Superman in a way that his friendships with other superheroes simply can't. I mean, a lot of people have never understood what is the point of Jimmy Olsen, but think about it. Jimmy Olsen is Superman's only human and normal friend. He makes this all-powerful god more human and relatable, and in this show, they gave him an incredibly charismatic personality, since his interest in conspiracy theories actually tie into the show, and they portray him as actually being very smart, like when they reveal that he always knew about Clark being an alien.
I can't believe our alarm clock exploded again. Why do you think that keeps happening?
Or immediately picking up that Clark likes Lois. Now, even though I've been praising the show a lot, I still wanted to talk about some of the negatives that it has. Like, even though a lot of the reinventions of classic characters the show does are sometimes good, some simply didn't work. Livewire, for example, has less personality than when she debuted on Superman the Animated Series, which sucks. She went from being an overly vocal and critical radio host with an alternative grunge style to being simply a generic mercenary with basically no personality. And this is something that sadly happens with a lot of other villains. They sacrifice their original and unique backstories for a homogenized backstory, with most of the villains of the show getting their abilities from the Kryptonian tech. And the costumes and visual looks are all too similar. This works for simplifying things and to connect all the plot threads in the show and move the main plot forward, but it also makes each villain less special by doing so. Another thing I didn't quite like are some of the more derivative and tired out ideas that the series focuses on, like the Council of Lois Lanes, for example, because while I do like that they integrated her into the plot, I did not like that they did so by using a really tired idea at this point. From the Council of Captain Britons, Kangs, Ricks, Reed Richards, Spider-Man, and now even Lois Lane, it's just too much. It's a tired idea at this point. So this series isn't perfect. No piece of art ever is, and even with its shortcomings, it's still an amazing show. This is also yet another story that focuses on an evil Superman plot, which yes, is also a very tired idea at this point, but it's also a thematically appropriate thing to adapt on the show at this point in Clark's life, because this is a Clark who's going through an identity crisis and doesn't even know the details about his past. He doesn't know if the Kryptonians were good people or if they were a species of evil conquerors. It's something that instills even more self-doubt into him and plays into his character arc. It's just really well thought out. But I think that what I loved the most from the season 1 finale, and my favorite scene from this show up until now, happened in episode 9, when Superman was fighting against Parasite in downtown Metropolis, who has the upper hand because he's absorbed so much energy from his surroundings, and it seems like Clark might lose. And it's here where the episode pulls off an amazing wholesome moment that completely captures the spirit of Superman and heroes in general, which happens when the people of Metropolis are asked to turn out all of the lights in the city in order to power down Parasite so that Superman can defeat him. At this point in the show, not everyone in Metropolis thinks that Superman is a good person. Some view him as a dangerous threat, but even then, in this dire moment, everyone was able to recognize that Superman isn't a threat. He's a good guy who's simply there to help at which point the entire city gets behind Clark and helps him to defeat Parasite. This is a beautifully executed moment that makes you think about those awesome scenes filled with hope from the Raimi Spider-Man films, where the people of New York help Spider-Man in the middle of his fights. It's just one of the many amazing moments that this series has, and I honestly can't wait to see even more from this great show. Allegedly, Season 2 is already in production, and these final episodes tease the debut of both Brainiac and General Zod, so there's a lot of stuff to be excited about. But I've rambled long enough about this show. Y'all already know that I really love it, but I want to know from you guys now. What did you think about the first season of My Adventures with Superman? What was your favorite episode? Which other characters would you like to see on the show? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and as always, thank you so much for watching.